Hey everybody, welcome to Coffee Time at the Water's Edge. Today we're going to be talking about the Book of First Enoch. What is that? Where did it come from? How should we think about it today? So we hope that you would join us for this conversation, grab a cup of coffee, and pull up. Hey everybody, once again, we are so delighted that you've joined us for Coffee Time at the Water's Edge. I got my man, Dr. Newman, on my right.
Hello.
Hello. I got Pastor Adam on my left.
Hello, hello.
And he's going to introduce us our coffee before we talk about the Book of First Enoch.
All right. This coffee is called Deep Snap. It's from the Grumpy Bear coffee. Grumpy Bear. And this coffee is a blend of Ugandan and Latin American coffee. Grumpy Bear, Deep Snap.
There you go. I like when Adam introduces, it's almost like he's asking questions.
These are like...
not asserting with confidence.
It's like foreign words to me. Like,
yeah.
Okay.
Central American. It's going to be more earthy. All right. Cheers. Cheers, mates. Good.
Wow. What was that? That's bold. That's dark.
I don't think it's either of those, but it's good.
It's pretty good. I don't know if it's bold or tart.
That's very good. Thanks, Rodney, for that.
Grumpy Bear.
So we randomly, I think, have recently got a couple of questions about the Book of Enoch.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what form those came in. I know a couple of them came your way.
Yeah, a couple of them came to me in the same week. Actually, in 2 days' time, I had somebody from the church ask me about it at community group. And then the next day I had a student come visit me, and he brought up about how he was trying to understand it because his mother-in-law, who is was really espousing it and giving all kinds of ideas and wanted to know more about it.
Yeah. So the book, the Enoch was rejected by the Jews. It was not a canonical book of the Old Testament. But there's been this renewed interest in the book, in popular literature and film and different things, largely because of some of the stuff it says about angels and the unseen realm. And there's been a lot written about that recently. And I think that's kind of brought the resurgence about it. So what do you guys think? What's your exposure to the book? What are your thoughts about Enoch? Or maybe we can just explain more of what it is.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, let me start by explaining the difference between a canonical book, an apocryphal book, and a pseudepigraphal book. And I know those are all big words, but canon refers to the 66 books of the Bible that everybody accepts. Whether you're Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, everybody accepts those 66 books. Apocryphal books refer to those books that are accepted by Roman Catholics and different Orthodox churches, but surprisingly enough, they don't all accept the same apocryphal books. Books like 1st and 2nd Maccabees and Bel and the Dragon fit into there. So apocryphal books are accepted by some. Pseudepigraphal books, we can say, were accepted by none. They were only accepted by certain cultish groups led by false teachers. And so they were never in the Bible, and so therefore never removed. And as you said, never accepted by the Jews as being canonical. In fact, the earliest version that we have of Enoch is around 200 BC. So that's the time period that fits in between the Testaments. The Old Testament had already been done, completed. Malachi written about 400 BC. So this is another couple hundred years after that. And from the best of what we know, the Book of Enoch wasn't even written in Hebrew. It was written in some Ethiopian language. So just so we understand the classifications and where it comes. So those who come along and say, well, why did they take it out of the Bible? They didn't, because it was never in there accepted by anybody at any time.
Rejected from the start, right?
Yeah.
So we have the pseudepigrapha. There's so many books that were written by people just claiming the name of somebody who would have given them more influence, right? More clout. It's like, oh, if Enoch wrote this, then of course, right? He's taken by God, the most godly of this line here.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that's one of the main things right off the bat. Dismiss it out of hand, right? All the pseudepigrapha.
Yeah. They can be included in part of what's called the Nag Hammadi Library, which was centered out in Egypt, again, which is made up of mostly pseudepigraphal books. And these books cover not only Old Testament time period, like Enoch, but also New Testament time period. For example, there's a Gospel of Barnabas and the Gospel of Thomas, and even fairly recently discovered, and by recently I mean within the last 15 years, the Gospel of Judas, which, by the way, states that Judas was the good guy and got deceived by Christ, and should not be condemned, as we often do.
Wow.
But so yeah, you're absolutely right, Adam. They claim to have an author that people would recognize, but
yeah, that's so the word itself, pseudepigrapha or pseudepigraphal as a category, or it's a compound word in Greek. Pseudo, we would recognize that. I think our audience would recognize what that word means. It's fake, right?
False.
Something's pseudo,
Right.
it's false, it's fake. And epigrapha comes from the word for to write, to writing, right? And so it's a fake writing,
Right.
And someone's name was attached to it to sort of lend credibility to it, to gain a wider audience. It would be like putting out a video or something and attributing to some famous person in our day that later on people would, come across and recognize, that wasn't actually that person that did it. That's kind of what this is.
right.
So it's in that category, but it has gained a lot of interest lately, largely because of all of the unique teaching in it. And there was some interesting stuff in the book. I've never read all of it, full disclosure. I have read a good chunks of it. And I've tried to dabble in more so the apocryphal books because of their acceptance by the Eastern Church and Roman Catholicism. But some of the pseudepigrapha, just out of interest, started reading some of those. I have here a breakdown of the Book of Enoch, so you can just kind of get an idea of what's in this. It's broken down into the first Enoch, that is. So there are some subsequent works that are distinct and different, and probably not even attributed in the same to the same person that wrote Enoch.
Right.
But the main one is often referred to as First Enoch. It has the Book of Watchers. That's about 36 chapters. It depends on what kind of translation you get.
Right.
And that's the one people love to talk about. We'll come back to that.
Yes.
The Book of Parables or Similitudes. Then you have one on astronomy.
Right.
There's like a section where it's about 10, 11 chapters where they talk about cosmology, astronomy, and movements of celestial bodies.
And that is also some of the beginnings of astrology in Jewish tradition as well.
Yeah, a lot of Jewish mysticism.
Oh, yeah.
You see a lot of Jewish mystic views expressed in this book, particularly among the last couple, the Book of Dream Visions and the Epistle of Enoch. The Epistle of Enoch's more about like exhortations to live righteously. Like there's some good stuff in there.
Right.
But I think that's sort of the construct of it. Now, some of the challenge we have, though, is that the Bible, the canonical books of the Bible, there are two instances in which one biblical author likely quotes from at least the same source that fed into Enoch, if not quotes Enoch. That would be in Jude 14:15. And then you have an allusion elsewhere by Peter. which may or may not, like it's not a direct quote for
Right.
sure. The Jude one's interesting. This is what Jude says. Jude, verse 14 and 15. It's only one chapter, so it says, "It was also about these that Enoch, the seventh from Adam." And I think it'd be good there to pause to recognize that even though this book of Enoch was not written by Enoch, Enoch was a real person.
Yes.
And he's in the Bible.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, like one of the strange figures that we see in the Bible, because what does it say about him in Genesis 5?
He didn't experience death.
Yeah.
Like, it says he walked with the Lord, and the Lord, then he was not.
Yeah.
He was not because
the
God
Lord took him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Wow.
it's like this there's already some mystery
Yes.
about him. And so it makes sense to pick him to kind of attach some esoteric teaching to,
Right.
and some mysticism and whatnot. And so, but Jude says, "It was also about these that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying," and then he begins this quote. And in Jude it says, "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all and to convict all of the ungodly of all of their deeds of ungodliness that they have committed in such an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things that ungodly sinners have spoken against him." Now, that's not it's not a word for word translation of, but it's very similar to where when you're reading them, you recognize, like, okay, this sounds a lot like Enoch chapter 1, verse 9.
Right.
Which I have it so it depends on the translation, but says something very similar. There's words that differ in there, but that doesn't mean, however, that Jude is quoting that. It could have been an oral tradition from Enoch that had somehow survived, the things that he had said, things like that. Could have been another source that both of them were drawing from. Or if it is, it doesn't mean that he's validating the book as a whole.
Right.
Exactly.
It could have been through divine inspiration that this was an actual prophecy of Enoch. You know, we believe the Bible's true.
Right.
So if Jude is saying Enoch said this, prophesied this, then we believe Enoch prophesied this.
Right.
Absolutely.
And if you look at the book of Jude, you'll notice that Jude starts off by saying, "I wanted to talk to you about our great salvation, but I need to talk to you about false teachers." And the rest of the book is all about false teachers. And he quotes from not only Enoch, but he also quotes from another pseudo-biblical book called The Assumption of Moses. And that confuses people because they think, well, if Jude quotes from it and Jude is inspired, does that say that these two books are inspired? And the fact is, no.
Right.
As I mentioned before, these books would have been held by what we today would refer to as a cult. And I think what Jude is doing there is referring to the cultist's own literature to condemn them. So for example, in the past when Jehovah's Witness would come to talk to me, I would quote from the Watchtower. Mm-hmm. Not because I believe it's inspired, but because if I say, well, you believe this, they say, oh, no, we don't. And I say, well, there it is.
Right.
This is your writing.
They hold them to their own standard.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what Jude is doing here.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. That's a good take. What else, fellas? Anything else with the illusion in Peter? I'm trying to think of what that was. Got it?
Yeah, he's talking about the angels leaving their original abode and being condemned by God. And that comes back to that first section of the Book of Enoch, the Watchers. So, and that seems to be the illusion that many people put there.
Yeah.
And if I might add, just to give a little bit more context, the Book of Enoch was written, as we said, probably about 200 BCE, and it was fairly widely populated around. Not that it was accepted, but people knew about it. And there were numerous early church fathers that didn't accept it as scripture, but accepted the information that was in there. And then somehow
Tertullian did.
Tertullian,
for sure. Yeah,
Justin
that
Martyr
stuff. Yep.
was another, Clement of Alexandria, Ambrose. But and then somehow, mysteriously, this book disappeared. I mean, there were very few copies of it, but it just disappeared. And so by the time that we come to Augustine or Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo, it's gone. And so what Justin Martyr and others believed was being taught by the Book of Enoch, Augustine just rejected and changed those concepts. And in fact, I found this very interesting. It wasn't discovered again, now get this, until 1773.
Wow.
Yeah, it was lost. And since then, it's been translated into other languages.
This is why they refer to it as the hidden book.
Yes. Yeah.
It feeds right into the conspiracy theories.
Right. Yeah.
No, I find that fascinating. I think it is because of the Book of Watchers, particularly, which I wasn't planning on going here, but I guess because Adam just preached on Genesis 6, the Book of Watchers gives a detailed account of the Nephilim. Mm-hmm. And it specifically starts naming angels and their leaders. 200. Matter of fact, it gives numbers. It says 200 angels led this rebellion.
Made the pact.
Yeah,
right.
And they made a pact together because their leader was like, I don't want to be alone in this because I'll be judged of some great sin. I think it's in chapter 6, the first 8 verses of chapter 6 of First Enoch. Mm-hmm. But they make this pact, and then they obviously come in, and it says that they take human wives as theirs, they breed with them, and then that gives the origin of the Nephilim there.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about that is that, according to Enoch, it was God who sent these 200 angels to earth to be watchers to help man. But somewhere along the line, they fell. And so what you have here then is literally 2 times that angels fell. One time with Satan, when he fell and took what the Bible tells us about 1/3 of the angelic host. And then, according to Enoch, this would be the second time of angels falling of their own accord. And as you said, Steve, cohabitating with people and, reproducing and so forth. So, and Enoch goes on even more spectacularly and says that their children were Nephilim, and that these Nephilim became giants who consumed everything and even desired to consume the human race. So, almost kind of a science fiction thing there.
Yeah. So you can see why people are kind of fascinated with the book in and of itself. Yeah. It's interesting.
And it's funny because if anybody's ever seen the movie Noah, who is, I can't remember.
Is it Russell Crowe?
I think so.
One of those guys.
Yeah, it's one of those
I'm
guys.
bad with actors' names.
Yeah, it's one of those.
Judge me if that's way off.
Yeah. But
that might be way off. I think it's Russell Crowe.
Yeah, they incorporate that into here because they have what they call rock monsters, who every now and then they call watchers.
From VeggieTales? Rock monsters? Didn't they have rock monsters on VeggieTales?
Who knows?
Is that in the Book of Enoch? Probably not. The rock monsters.
No.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting stuff.
Well, when you were just talking about just the some of those early, you mentioned Justin Martyr, Josephus, Eusebius. I think there's all the ones you mentioned as well, who held to this. They held to that first view of the fallen angels being the sons of God. But then during the time of Augustine, now the book has disappeared, right? Mm-hmm. At the same time where there's now a new thinking on Genesis 6. And I don't know, maybe you want to talk a little bit about the other.
Yeah, so we were having a lively, brotherly love conversation because Adam preached Genesis 6 on Sunday, and I think he did a wonderful job, and I was commending him for a great sermon. But I did, in giving some godly criticism, acknowledge that he presented the case that these were fallen angels as an open and shut case, where actually I'm on the other side of this. I don't think that the Nephilim were the product of angels breeding with women. And so I just said that, you know, it was a great sermon. That's certainly a reading that many have taken, but it's not the only position that people hold on this, and scholars have debated this for a long time. And so I'm open to that view. I happen to lean more on the other side of it, that the godly line of Seth is the reference there to the sons of God, and the intermarriage with the line of Cain corrupted them. And so now there was this kind of righteous strand from at the end of chapter 4 of descendants of Seth who were invoking the name of the Lord. And then in chapter 5, God says that, it says that God created Adam, and then it jumps right to Seth, and then it traces his line down to Noah. And this is the righteous line, right? And so I think that's the reference to the sons of God. Other reasons that I've rejected it, the same reason Augustine rejected it, is that, you know, what Jesus says about angels. He says that angels neither marry nor are given in marriage. Now, that does not necessarily mean that they don't reproduce or have sexual organs, but I think if God did not create them to marry or be given in marriage, I think it's a logical inference that he would not give them the desire or tools in that way to reproduce if he didn't create the boundaries with it that he gave to human beings, unless there's some other standard by which they have sex and utilize outside of marriage, which would seem inconsistent to me with God. So I think the very nature of angels as being immaterial beings, as being perhaps genderless, we don't know that for sure. The only angels mentioned by name take on the form of masculine. There's no feminine form of the word for angel. And so it's likely or plausible at least, that angels are genderless. And so,
actually, in the book of Ezekiel, we do have reference to 2 female angels.
Yeah, but you got to look at that closely. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
and they use a different word.
It is.
And
it is.
And I'm not convinced they're angels.
Is it a vision of?
It's a vision that Ezekiel has. Yeah.
But he mentions angels in the same area and uses a completely different word. So I'm like, I don't think he's describing angels. It's only because he has wings. But angels aren't usually described as having wings. That's more of a human invention.
Yeah. In fact, only cherubim and seraphim are said to have wings amongst the angelic creatures. Another option to what you were saying, though, is that it is fallen angels, but they have demonically possessed human beings and are procreating that way. And, you know, there was a very strong belief back that time of generational curses that would, you know, last for years and generations, and that would have to be destroyed. You know, it's the supernatural understanding versus the natural understanding. And, you know, personally, I go more with the supernatural, primarily because of the phrase B'nai Elohim, referring to the sons of God. But, yeah, I can see either one. I began, began in education believing the Seth and Cain lineage. But then the more I learned Hebrew, the more study I did, the more I began to go over to the other side. But, you know, coming back again to the Book of Enoch, it's just very fanciful. And you can see why, you've got 2 fallings of angels away from God, and, you know, angels being named again. Also in the Book of Enoch, something that's interesting is that we find Noah petitioning God to forgive the Nephilim, and God refuses and destroys them. And, you know, that obviously brings to my mind the story in Genesis of Abraham trying to negotiate with God regarding Sodom and Gomorrah. And he says, 100 righteous men, you know, okay, 10, 10, Lord. And God says, now there's not even 10 there.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you to me, I see that joining and combining of different stories together into this one story.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's pretty fascinating, especially when you start examining the literature and how people thought about them. Adam was citing some early Jewish writings that adopt the supernatural view as well. There are, but on the opposite side of that, there are Jewish targums that certainly were informed by views bleeding into from the intertestamental period into the first century, in which they clearly say that these were human beings.
Right.
And so that would have been the rabbinic interpretations of Genesis in the Targums that were holding the other view. And then you have, and I think maybe that's why Augustine too, I don't know how much exposure he had to that, but I think with Enoch disappearing and sort of that strand, people quoting and acknowledging Enoch, and it's like, that's not in the Bible.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Right.
So,
that's right.
But we have these Jewish targums that have this opposite view, and based on his belief of how angels were created,
right.
He rejects that view. Yeah.
And one theory that's out there, I find this interesting.
Are we on the origin of the Nephilim now, or
No, we're still on Enoch.
Okay.
Kind of both.
We're kind of mixing this conversation and all together.
Yeah,
I guess it bleeds together.
One theory now is that, and like I said, Enoch was removed from the Bible, which we've already concluded it never was in.
Right.
But it was removed from the Bible because it was written in some type of Ethiopian dialect in Ethiopia, which of course is in Africa. And so it was all racist. And so the Book of Enoch was removed because of racism.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, that's convenient considering all that we have going on in our society today. Enoch is a victim now.
He's been canceled.
He's been canceled. Or the church canceled him because, there was Africans there. So, the things that people come up with are just kind of incredible.
Yeah. Awesome. Anything else? So the views back on the Nephilim, you hold the supernatural view that these were not possessed human beings, but actual embodied angels that took women as wives.
I can go either way with that. I can see the Nephilim as being a mixture, a hybrid of human and angelic creatures, and knowing that angels are incapable of salvation would mean that race of people would have to be destroyed. And that would have been unique to the time of the flood. And, I also see both Christ and Peter referring to, as in the days of Noah, reference to the return of Christ and the demonic activity that is going to be seen in those end days. And so I can see it also as possession and a higher level of demonic activity.
Yeah. One of the arguments that I like to make and I don't even want to say, I'm not anti-supernatural. I believe the Bible, I believe all the miracles and all of that.
You are,
and I think those are very plausible interpretations. But I think with the sons of God, yes, the Hebrew phrase is used in Job to refer to angels. I think it's clear in the Job context that those are angels. I don't think it's as clear in Genesis. Conceptually, sons of God does refer to Israel all throughout the Old Testament in multiple ways. It even in the New Testament refers to us, to Christians, right? Blessed are the peacemakers. They shall be called sons of God. So I don't think you can just say that sons of God always refers to this.
No,
but that was an argument he was making.
In the
and I'm
Hebrew,
like, well,
though, it's not. It's only used that way, and it's only used a few times.
but it's only used twice, in Job and in Genesis. And I'm saying, and then you have
it's
to look
also
at the
used in
context.
Psalms in a different format, in Ben Elohim, a singular format. But one of the things we got to keep in mind is that when we look at grammar and words, you have what is called the principle of first mention. And the principle of first mention basically states that what the word means the first time it is used is probably what it's going to mean the rest of the time. And so we have to be careful going to Job and saying, well, it means this in Job, so therefore it must mean this in Genesis. Now, of course, you could argue, well, Job was probably written before Genesis. So is Job the principle of first mention, or is it coming from Genesis? So, again, I believe B'nai Elohim refers to angelic creatures, although you're right, it does refer to Israel in the Old Testament a few times. So I think it's one of those where, we can agree to disagree and we can be staunch on what we believe, but,
the other line of argument was, I don't think that Genesis 6 explicitly states that the Nephilim were the offspring of these. In fact, I actually think it says the opposite. I think that when you read it, and we talked about this grammatically, it certainly can appear that they're already on the earth as a historical context marker. Like this was occurring, the sons of God going into the daughters of men was occurring in the days when the Nephilim were on the earth. And it says they were on the earth after, which presents another problem, I think, for the supernatural view, because they come up again in numbers.
Right.
And so if they're eliminated by the flood, if that's God's judgment on them, and they're eliminated and bound in chains, then how do they appear after the flood in the book of Numbers? And I know there's some different theories, but
you're right.
But when they appear again, they're the sons of men. Like they're the sons of Anak.
Right.
And so
Goliath and his family. Right. Yeah. And, along with that, the thing is that Nephilim, first off, it's masculine plural. Anything in Hebrew that ends with I am, like Elohim, is masculine plural. But it's translated giant. But the most literal translation is fallen ones.
Yeah.
So, how do you correlate that? How does a giant become a fallen one? And, is there some change in definition over the time? So,
yeah.
It's
all good. It's all good. I like this conversation. It was good. I'm glad we brought this out, only because it's good for our people to know too that we love each other, we trust each other. I completely trust Adam in the way he handles the Bible. There was nothing negative in that way. All I was saying to him is that there's a known disagreement on this issue, and that you can have your convictions, but you always want to, particularly on issues that aren't as clear. And I know you're convinced it's clear. I'm just not. And I'm saying that if there's other biblically plausible explanations, then I think that you at least can't dismiss those as like strawman arguments. And that was our conversation. Yeah. So it was good. Mm-hmm. It'd be a great word though.
All right.
Anything else?
Well, the only thing I was going to say, and just as Nephilim, because there's Nephilim after the flood, and there's Nephilim. Where are the Nephilim? They're in Canaan, who is the offspring of Ham, right? Mm-hmm. So we have Ham. Likely his wife would have had some sort of Nephilim within her. I believe it was probably a much smaller degree, and that's why also just in some archology things that I've looked into.
Did God fail in his ability to wipe out
part of his plan?
He was wiping out all the ungodly on the earth. Mm-hmm. But did he fail at that?
That wasn't his intent. What I'm saying is the archaeological, the Nephilim that were before the flood were far larger than the Nephilim after the flood.
Yeah, that's debatable, but you can say
that's my view.
I think they were NBA players.
They were rock monsters.
I think you look at Victor Wembanyama today, and that we're going to call him a Nephilim. This guy's 7 foot.
I'm talking like 20, 30 feet, or
wow,
like in the old, like in the that's what I'm talking about, giants.
So you've seen there's archaeological evidence for that.
Yeah, look up
credible archaeological evidence for that.
Timothy Alberino, check him out.
Oh gosh, you're going to send us down a conspiracy rabbit hole.
All right. But I do think the description in Genesis, men of renown, is not talking about the fact that they were just famous, but that they were famous for sin.
For violence and as warriors.
Famous for being rebels against God. So, yeah. And, we see that even earlier with Lamech, who says, hey, if they're going to do this to Cain, then I'll avenge it 7 times 7.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Are we good?
Interesting. Everybody do your own research.
Thank you guys for tuning in. Hopefully our musings at the end there didn't turn you off. I hope that you were blessed and somehow edified by this conversation today. Good question. I mean, it's out there. What are these other books that are popping up? And so thank you. We do encourage you, if you have not already, to subscribe to our channel. You can do that on YouTube if you're watching there, or if you're listening on one of our podcast platforms, Apple or Spotify. We'd love for you to subscribe to that and to leave a review. That would be encouraged. And as Rodney says, just give us a 5-star review. That would be wonderful. We would appreciate that. Amen. Your engagement matters. And so thank you for supporting us. God bless you all. Have a great day.
God bless.
Peace out.
Bye.